right, we'll get started. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome once again to a fabulous Greater Lawrence Chamber of Commerce Chamber Chat. We give them a little extra love. Presented by Bose, McKinney, and Evans. We want to thank them for their sponsorship. Today, we have a very special guest joining us. He is the head of public policy for the Nature Conservancy. I'm doing this off the cuff. Usually I got somebody who introduces you. I have an Ed McMahon, and my Ed couldn't join us today, and I forgot to bring the notes. So
you're in the neighborhood.
You're in charge of public policy for the Nature Conservancy of Indiana. Right. You used to be with the Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute. You were there for 9 years. Yep. Prior to that, you worked for the Indy Star, Indianapolis Business Journal. You were the twice. That's right. You were with them twice. You were the Statehouse reporter for Gannett, I believe, and you worked for KPM or KM?
No, it's the Journal Gazette.
Journal Gazette. Okay,
Yeah.
the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette. So,
Clearly.
yeah, you're older than I am. You've had an illustrious career. You also were a panelist on Indiana Beacon Review, and most importantly, you were a co-board member with me at the Indianapolis Press Club.
We had some interesting times that we ran.
We did. So yeah, we literally closed down the bar.
Right?
So,
yeah,
Russ,
that kind of killed the show right there.
it did. So, yeah,
All the way out the Press Club.
here's to the Press Club. So Russ, I'm sounding good out there. Cool. So
He
John,
would know.
Actually, Russ knows all. I should have. So this week we're also coming live from Triton Brewing Company at historic Fort Bend. So next time you get thirsty or hungry, come and check them out. So thank you, Triton Brewing, for hosting us. Yep. So John, let's just talk politics. First, politics and how it relates to your new gig. So what does the Director of Public Policy for the Nature Conservancy do?
Well, mostly we interact with the state legislature, the governor's office, and we try to promote good public policy as it relates to nature. That's kind of a tough sell in Indiana. We have lots of people in the state who are very passionate about nature, and I think the pandemic has helped show that. For instance, the state parks had 21,000 additional annual passes sold last year that they had the previous year. So people love it, but the legislature doesn't love it so much. They don't invest in, there's a Benjamin Harris Public Trust that helps to buy land to conserve, that the DNR uses, that not-for-profits can use. It hasn't had an additional, and it's funded by the environmental license plates. The legislature hasn't put any additional funding into that in more than 10 years. Right now, we're fighting a repeal of the regulation of isolated wetlands in Indiana that would threaten 800,000 acres of these vital parts of the ecological system. And so the legislature in Indiana doesn't really appreciate nature as, say, most Hoosiers do. And then we also interact with our federal policymakers, the senators, and the members of Congress for additional funding and good public policy. Climate change and climate effects is one of our major public policy areas. We work with other not-for-profits, the government, to try to help utilities understand that emissions are a big part of the problem. They're responding. We're trying to use natural habitat, their natural features, forests, farming practices, et cetera, to help sequester carbon, those kinds of things. And so we try to foster that kind of public policy.
So what's the pushback in Indiana?
The pushback from the legislature?
Yes.
I don't think they see it as a worthy investment. And as you understand, our legislature happens to be very transactional in nature, in the sense that they want to see a benefit, either for the state or for the interests that they represent. And so I don't think they see nature in that way right now. And it's, I think, unfortunate, because the truth of the matter is, and again, as the pandemic pointed out, nature is incredibly valuable when it comes to the resilience necessary to weather, whether it's a pandemic, or climate change, or the extreme changes in all of our weather patterns. We try very diligently, and it comes from my background as a fiscal policy person, to show the return on investment from putting a few dollars into nature. So we're trying to change that calculus, trying to help many members of the legislature understand that. Some do. We're trying to help a majority understand that.
So I'm getting told by the audience that I need to up the volume just a smidge. I can do that. That might actually help the online people too. I changed it so the speaker's going out.
Yeah, it does actually.
Oh, good. We're hearing from the audience. It does make it. So, all right, first let's talk about your successes, then we'll come back to legislative funding. Okay. So you've got Goose Pond down in southern Indiana. I know up around Jasper Pulaski, Fish and Wildlife area, I guess. You've got property up there that I've seen. You've got an old oxbow that has been isolated from the Wabash River down along the Ohio River. Bend. Yeah. So tell everybody who's watching, how do you go about raising money for those? And how do you make those acquisitions happen?
Well, let me go one step back and give you a little bit of history of the chapter. We're more than 60 years old, which puts us at the very beginning of the Nature Conservancy movement. The Nature Conservancy is a national organization with international operations in more than 70 countries and in all 50 states, but they're organized by chapters. And so Indiana is a chapter distinct of itself as part of this larger organization. So we raise money for the acquisitions that we do in a number of ways. Most of it has come from private donations, people who are doing good work and want to help promote that, and so they'll give us money to do that. For instance, it's probably been 15 years ago now, a woman named Sally Reard in her estate gave us $41 million, which we then used to make a lot of the acquisitions that you just talked about. What we do with that, though, is we couple that with money from funding from government sources, from other not-for-profits, partners, the state, the Department of Natural Resources, those kinds of organizations. And we made that $41 million buy $120 million worth of land. And then once we buy it, we create an endowment then to conserve that land. And by that, I mean manage it, make sure that the invasive species are removed, that trails are built, that other amenities that might be used. Some of the land is just kept so that it's there for biologists and other scientists to study, but most of it's available to the public to enjoy and to use. And you mentioned Jasper Pulaski. That's we have some land there, but what we call it is Kankakee Sands. Okay, and it's an area to the east or to the west of Jasper Pulaski. And it was 8,000 acres we picked up in 1995. And it was a lake. It was a large freshwater lake at one time that the people up there drained in the early part of the 20th century. Once that was drained, they farmed it. It was terrible farmland, but they farmed it. We bought it from Prudential, which had bought it as an investment. And over the years, we've restored the prairie there. We used seed that we had harvested from the native plants. We replanted it. We've repopulated most of that area with about 600 different species of natural plants. And then about 5 years ago, we brought in a herd of bison, nearly 100% bison. They are as pure blood bison as you can get. And we had, I think, 70 at the time. We were up to about 120 now. And we are now, we brought them in to manage the grass. Their function is not to be like zoo animals. Their function is to help us manage that grass, which they do very well. And so now we are in exchange programs with Native American populations that are now trying to reintroduce bison into their native lands. And it helps keep the bison line from getting too pure, too adulterated. And then we're able to keep that with our herd too. So it's a fascinating place, and it's a great work. We have about 60 people across the state who do those kinds of things.
So how easy is it to convince a landowner? You mentioned like Prudential. Mm-hmm. It was probably less productive than some of the other ground that was around there or land in their holdings. How easy it is to convince a landowner to donate their land or sell on the cheap something? Do they get a tax benefit if they sell it at 50 cents on the dollar?
Sometimes there are tax benefits available to them, and there is a number of ways to conserve the land. It doesn't have to be a fee simple or a deed transfer. There are covenants that you can have agreements on. But the important thing here is that we only work with willing sellers. You know, we will talk. I'm thinking of a transaction not long ago where our forester down there had been talking with the landowner for 20 years. You know, hey, this is great. Kept up the conversation all the time. And so maybe it's maybe it's on there. Who knows? But the key is that we're not going to push your arm to buy your land, but if you want to sell it, we'd like an opportunity to have it. And so that's how we try to operate, and we think that that's a good way to work the long game, and I think that our record has showed that it's been successful.
So let me ask you, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking the rail splitter.
Cheers.
Cheers. It's good stuff. Cameron Carter would be very pleased that I'm drinking the rail splitter.
Good. I've got a hometown hero. I love this stuff.
It's all good. I like how fresh Triton's beer is.
I agree. So let me ask you, you've obviously been a political vagabond, as you mentioned. You worked for the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. You worked for the Indianapolis Business Journal. You wrote about business, but you were a panelist on Indiana Week in Review. You've covered the Statehouse before. What intrigued you about getting involved with the Nature Conservancy?
Well, I'm a Ranger Rick kid. I had an uncle who lived on a farm in Steuben County that's still in our family. And it had about 30 acres of woods with an old cemetery and a creek that ran through it. And so he got me this Ranger Rick subscription, and I loved it. If I was good at science, I might have actually pursued that, but I'm not any good at science. I go and do all these other things. The Fiscal Policy Institute does tremendous work and still does tremendous work. Chris Watt's running it now, and he does great work in trying to inform the public on how Indiana's tax and fiscal policy works. But I found out I'm not very good at fundraising, Brad.
Brother, those who are own the world, and yeah, I'm with you because it's a portion of what I do.
It is, and I respect that, and I understand it, but I realized I wasn't very good at it. Somebody who was better at it should do that. So, I was casting about, trying to figure it out, and, there are connections and all this, and a board member connected me with the state director at the time, Mary McConnell, and we talked, and she thought it was a good fit, and I was ready to go because I had always respected the Nature Conservancy and its work, and the chance to call a day in the woods work is the best thing in the world.
So how often do you get to go spend the day in the woods?
As often as I possibly can.
It's Friday during session. So, given your job, are you at the Statehouse every day? How often are you over there and interacting with elected officials, or is a lot of that work done pre-session?
Well, actually, a lot of it is done pre-session, but we do monitor legislation. This year, in particular, with the wetlands bill being such a threat, we've been highly engaged in that with a variety of partners across the conservation landscape. But, I would guess that in a normal session, I'm over there a couple of days a week, maintaining relationships, following bills, maybe testifying in the committee, something like that. But most of the time, it's not being a creature of the Statehouse like it once was.
Okay. So now is a good time to once again thank our sponsor, Bose McKinney and Evans, attorney at law. They also have a public affairs division. John, thanks you. You're not getting paid to.
No, but I'm trying to help you fundraise.
I appreciate that. And I want to thank them because they stepped up. I did this last year. We had 0 sponsors. So anything above 0 is good.
That's 100%, man.
It is. So let's talk about your controversial new incoming chair.
Your sister.
My sister is going to, she's always been involved. John once knew 6 or 8 months ago that my sister has been on his board for a while. He since forgot until 5 minutes before the show started today.
It's true. I'm not very good at my job.
Oh, you're great at your job. Now, my sister denies that we're related.
She hasn't denied it to me.
But has it come up?
I don't know. Maybe not.
So, and our mom is in the audience. In fact, let me bring her in. We'll add a wave, Mom. You're now on the recorded permanent. You're on the permanent record of this show. So, actually, we'll see. Now's an opportunity for us to ask, are there questions from our audience? Russ Dodge, you always have a question. Here, use the mic.
With my rail splitter here and go into the microphone. Not that I'm shy around the microphone, but I wanted to go back to the Indiana Weekend Review. Tell us a little bit about working with Mike McDaniel and Ann Delaney. It just looked like it was a blast to always watch.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed watching it because it was a lot of fun to do. It was a privilege for me to be able to be on Indiana Weekend Review. The camaraderie that I think came through on screen was real. I mean, so were the arguments. There was no put on. And actually, the one time that I saw Ann nearly levitate in the chair, it wasn't at Mike, it was at a substitute Republican that week. I thought she was going to behead that poor person. But the arguments often carried out into the parking lot, and so the show was actually probably a little more entertaining in the parking lot for the 4 or 5 of us that left and joined at the same time. But I have a lot of respect for both of them because they operated from, politics wasn't a zero-sum game at that point. I think it's more so today, unfortunately. And they respected each other. They end up liking each other and becoming very good friends. But when they were going at it in the mid 80s and late 80s and early 90s, it was for keeps. You know, they tried to win every race. And but I think when I mentioned the zero-sum game, the thing is they recognize that good public policy benefits as many people as possible. And if you've got your opponent in a bind, give that opponent an opportunity to get something out of the process as well, as opposed to just thumbing them into oblivion. So that's what I always like about them. And we all remained. I went to a basketball game with Mike during the tournament. So it's great to keep in touch with all of them. And it was a privilege to be part of the show. A lot of fun.
So how did you end up on that show?
I filled in for Sue Dillman. And then I became the regular fill-in for, 2-4 years. Actually 5 years. I started in 95 as a fill-in, and then Sue left in 2000 to take a job with Indiana University. And so they asked me to take her place, and I was on until 2018.
So you probably won't be surprised by this, but the quickest no I've ever gotten on a request for anything was the time I asked Jim Shella if I could come on as the libertarian panelist. I don't even think I had the words out of my mouth before the no was already no.
Well, you can take some comfort in the fact that happened to a lot of people who had that kind of a request, whether it was the Libertarian Party or some other group. Yep, didn't have a chance. Jim's view of politics is binary, completely. And so there was no chance. But props to you for trying.
Hey, you don't know what you don't know.
Oh, you knew what the outcome was going to be.
Actually, I had a pretty good idea, although...
You were just surprised at how fast it happened.
Actually, you'll appreciate this. So, my 2 great Jim Shella stories, if you'll indulge me.
Sure.
Number 1, so when he was the political reporter at Wish TV, we had a hard time. He didn't want to cover us, and I thought we were newsworthy. So we called a press conference on something very newsworthy, and we said we're going to be giving this address on the front steps of Wish TV at 22nd Meridian Street. So they reluctantly sent out a cameraman, and Jim Shella went out there. I think he was still eating his lunch, and I'm almost positive that somebody told him he had to.
I'm not surprised.
So, but given that, and I knew that the press club was near and dear to his heart, and I wanted to be involved with the press club, I called him and said, Jim, would you be my sponsor to the press club? Which then put him in a bind because he wanted to ignore I existed, but he also loved the press club. So he was my sponsor into the press club.
Well, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but I would guess that over time, he's not anti-Brad.
He's not anti-Brad.
He was anti anybody besides an R or a D.
He was, because it made his job 50% harder because there was one additional party to cover. But no, actually, Jim and I have become friends over the years. But you're right. Initially, well, and I got to respect the man. We didn't put the most sane candidates on the ballot 20 years ago either. So,
well, that's true of a lot of things these days. Which not the libertarians that are putting the strange candidates.
The funny thing is, some of my candidates from 20 years ago look pretty darn sane compared to what's happening right now.
That's a low bar, man.
It is. What time is it? There we go. So, first, put in a plug for the Nature Conservancy. I brought a copy of your publication. Tell people how they can receive one of these publications.
Well, they can become a member of the Nature Conservancy. You can go to Nature. Yes, I know. It's amazing. We're all pitching things here today. You can go to nature.org/Indiana, find out what's happening in Indiana and what we're working on. And if you're so inclined, you think our work is worth it, we'd love to have you supported as a member. So clearly, Brad and your family are highly involved, and we're grateful for that. I should know the number of members that we have in Indiana. I don't know what the number of members is in Indiana.
I would venture to say thousands.
It is thousands, and we're very fortunate. It includes my mother. She tells me all the time that she's a member of the Nature Conservancy, and is glad for that. So I think, if you go to nature.org/Indiana, you can find out how to become a member of the Nature Conservancy. We very much welcome that.
Outstanding. I think we have another question from the audience. Let me pull out my mic and Mark, come on around to the side of the table.
So there's there's many states that have the Nature Conservatory. And how does Indiana rank among our fellow states? I know we lag behind in, some of the energy initiatives like solar energy, things like that from a state. Are we behind in your opinion, on our initiatives with the wetlands? And
we don't look at it in terms of ranking between. We do have a chapter in every state, and I do work with my colleagues across the country on a lot of these kinds of issues. We're organized by region as well, so there's a Midwest region of 5 states, and we do a lot of collective work, but we don't rank that kind of activity. We're ahead in some places and behind in others, and here's one where we're surprisingly ahead in, and I'll share with you. And it's not from a ranking perspective, but from the work. I talked earlier about climate change and the effort to reduce greenhouse gases. Since 2005, Indiana has been second to only one other state in terms of the amount of reduction of greenhouse gases in the air. And that's in large part because the major utilities have cut back on their coal-burning plants, and all of them will be retired early before 2050. So, and many of them before 2030. So, Indiana has done a good job of, despite our current rankings. I think we were in the news today for the fact that our air is among some of the dirtiest in the country. And there are many reasons for that, but the amount of greenhouse gases being emitted is lower than it has been historically, and we're working to improve that. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, we're not by any means a state that is leading the nation in terms of reducing or having a clean environment. But most of that is because of our industrial heritage. Right. As a manufacturing state, that produces a lot of residual effects that are bad for the environment. But that's changing, and it's being adopted, and better practices are being adopted. So that's the area that we work. We try to help convince the legislature that there's a good approach, something that can offer benefits to those who are either regulated or polluting, and it will benefit then the rest of the citizenry of the state. That's the balance that we try to inject into the public policy debate, and to help legislators and other regulators understand that it's good business to have a cleaner environment because it's better for everybody in so many ways.
How connected are you to the state system? What they do,
Right. No, we're not in lockstep by any means. And the question is, how do we operate with state parks and the Department of Natural Resources? We do a lot of work with them, and in fact, we do acquire some lands that we then later either sell to the state or oftentimes give to the state to fill in, areas where the state forest is, or adjacent to a park, or things like that. Goose Pond, which Brad mentioned earlier, is a project where we acquired a lot of land and helped the state to develop that land back into an area for migratory birds and all kinds of other habitat to flourish in. And we do that kind of work all the time, but we do it as a partnership, not in a we maintain great relations. I count many of the people in the DNR as colleagues in some ways, but they have their purpose and their agenda, and we have ours. And where they mesh, then we try to work together.
Thank you. Good question, Mark. So to follow up on Mark's question, so the DNR, so in addition to just the lands and the nature aspect, do you also kind of lean on the legislature, the DNR, to put money back into their facilities, like the inn, or we've got a conference center over here? Because I think all those go hand in hand. If you've got a nice welcome to guests, odds are it's going to be used more.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that our state parks were among the earliest in the country. Our state park system began as part of our centennial in 1960. And the state park movement had only started in the 20 years previous to that. So we were pretty early adopters. We had been pretty bad about maintaining a lot of the facilities. And it's the unsexy stuff. It's, having clean water. It's having a good way to get rid of wastewater. It's the electricity. It's, the foundations, those kinds of things. So we did help when it came time to, the governor carved out some money for maintenance for all kinds of state facilities. We advocated on behalf of DNR for a fair amount of that money to go to state parks and other state other properties under DNR's authority, like nature preserves and things like that. And it has been. They've spent about $30 million in the last year. I think they've got in the books another $30 or $40 million worth of maintenance that they're putting into the facilities. It's the kind of things that frankly you won't see, but it'll make your experience a lot better. And I think that the new head of the DNR, Dan Bortner, comes from the state parks. He ran state parks for several years. I think he intrinsically understands the value and the branding that can go along with that. So I think that the state recognizes finally that its state parks are true gems, and that if they put a little money into them, you're going to get people from all over. And they're expecting a record year this year.
Well, I know I met with the head of Fort Harrison State Park right over here over our shoulder. I had lunch with him last fall. And as you mentioned, when COVID hit, the one thing you can do to not be around people is to be outside and enjoy the parks. And and there's been times I've driven by and the line's backed up all the way on Post Road. So I know
in that line.
I know that they're getting a lot of use. So do you there's probably a formula out there that says if you invest X number of dollars, you get X return on ecotourism, I guess, for lack of a better word?
If there is, I'm not aware of it, Brad. I'm sorry, I don't know that statistic, but I do know that the new, I forget what it's called, but they created a kind of a quasi-governmental organization to promote the state better. And I know that they have finally come around to the idea that if you put a couple of dollars into advertising and promotion that you're going to get more money back from people who come, not just from across Indiana, which is great because, you know, you want people to visit the different state parks, but also from surrounding states and other areas. But it's phenomenal. You know, we have our favorite state parks, and among them is Spring Mill down in Lawrence County. We've been taking our kids there for probably 20, 25 years. I can't imagine how much money we've spent in Bedford and Mitchell and in all the areas around there, and happily so, because it's a great experience. You put those two things together, you've got a winning combination.
Good. Well, John Ketzenberger, thank you very much for being our guest.
My pleasure.
Oh, I ask every one of my guests, what is your favorite thing about Lawrence?
Oh, wow. I think this might be close to the very favorite thing. I think Fort Harrison is a tremendous asset to, of course, Lawrence, but also to the greater Indianapolis area. I remember when the Base Realignment and Closing Commission was looking at what to do in the early 90s, and there was real concern about what would happen to both Lawrence and the city if you know, the base closed, and I think the outcome there has been very beneficial because having a state park right here, having all of this that's being created around it, I think it's wonderful. I think it's a real highlight for Lawrence. That and the softball facility that we used to go down to over on Franklin Road all the time. But that's a different story.
Well, I agree, because you're right. I remember when that was happening, and my fear was that yeah, they were going to take the military base, and suddenly it was going to be warehouses and it wasn't going to serve a purpose that the public could enjoy. So, I mean, that was one of the reasons Sheila and I moved here. So,
well, and I think you're not alone. I know a lot of people who moved over here for a lot of different reasons, all of them good. And I think it's the realization of a lot of people who, you know, they have their political differences, and there have been a lot of political fights over all this. There's no two ways about it. But I think in the long run, the outcome has been very positive for Lawrence, certainly, and for the city at large. And I think as a result for everybody. So, got to keep your eye on that ball, man.
I'm gonna try. I'm with you. And obviously, I have a family connection. I'll get ostracized if I'm not there backing you all the time.
Well, I appreciate it.
So, well, John Ketzenberger, thank you very much for joining us.
My
for
pleasure.
those of you at home, you've been watching Chamber Chat, presented by Bose, McKinney, and Evans. As always, we will have this posted. Since today's Friday afternoon, I'm not going to post it today. It'll be up sometime on Monday on our YouTube channel, and we'll put it out on our Facebook page. We'll be back in a week and a half. Typically, we do these on Wednesday afternoons. I imagine we'll be doing this in about 12 days and be back on our Wednesday schedule. I will let you all know. So again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, John. Thank you for our crowd out here. There's several people that were not on the mic that have joined us. So thank you all for being a part of it. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.